Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a video about a Tarzan miniseries about a curse that may have been cursed itself. This is a comic series that actually marked the end of Tarzan comics at not one but two companies, and actually marked the end of monthly Tarzan comics in America, period, for the last like 22 years. This is a series that was never completed, and yet there were actually two issues that were finished that were never released in America. This is a good series put out under unfortunate circumstances. I am talking about Tarzan and the Rivers of Blood. So first of all, a little bit of backstory. So when Malibu Comics started publishing Tarzan comics by Simic International, they talked about upcoming projects in the back of Tarzan the Warrior. This was the first miniseries they put out. One of them was Thomas Yeats's Tarzan the Beckoning, which I've already done a review of. That one actually got published. And then the other one was by Igor Kordy, a miniseries called Tarzan and the Rivers of Blood, and they even published this really gorgeous portfolio of, this really doesn't have anything to do with the miniseries, but just showing you what Igor Kordy could do with Tarzan. And you knew you could look forward to a really good miniseries, at least with the art. And it was talked about as a 4-issue miniseries back then. Now, once they got to The Beckoning, they stopped talking about Rivers of Blood, and The Beckoning was the final miniseries they put out. And so when Dark Horse took over Tarzan Comics in 1995, the first comic they put out was Tarzan, A Tale of Mugambi, with art by Igor Kordy, and this was a companion comic to Rivers of Blood. This was kind of a one-shot side project, and as you can tell from the cover, it is beautiful but strange. It is a tale of Tarzan that is absolutely beautifully drawn. Like, this is just one of the prettiest comics you could possibly own, but it is a Tarzan comic about Tarzan but without Tarzan in it. So basically there is this storyteller who tells this story about Tarzan, and it's highly fictionalized. It's reimagining Tarzan as this godlike being who rules over the jungle, and it reimagines Mugambi, which is, this guy who's his partner. He's like this African who, sometimes helps him on his adventures, as this magical creature who was born out of Tarzan's shadow. And it's a really cool story. I mean, if you're into like folklore and mythology and stuff like that, it's interesting. It's not really a traditional Tarzan story. So it was a really weird way to start, because most of Dark Horse's stuff was very traditional, very much in keeping with Burroughs' stuff. And so I kind of consider Tale of Mugambi kind of a soft opening for Dark Horse, something that they could get out but wasn't necessarily representative of what they would do. And the thing that made it even stranger is that the series that it was supposed to be a companion for would not come out until 1999. We're talking like 95 to 99. There's this huge gap, and then finally, Rivers of Blood at long last. So when Rivers of Blood got to Dark Horse and was finally published in 99, it had become an 8-issue miniseries. Not sure why that was. Obviously, it was originally announced as a 4-issue. But let's take a look at these covers. So 4 issues were published of Rivers of Blood. And so this is the first cover. And I would say it's probably a little too monotone. Probably everything's a little too red, or the same shade of red. But look at the rendering on this cover. Look at the emotion in Tarzan's eyes. Have you ever seen a more human and a more powerful image of Tarzan? This is so gripping. I wish they could like recolor it a little bit to up the contrast, but other than that, this is a really impressive cover. The second issue cover is absolutely beautiful, and this is such a great traditional Tarzan image with him, yelling in primal fury, witch doctor's mask, and, this beautiful but eerie, purple jungle behind him. It's just so good. The third issue's cover actually has him in civilization in regular clothing, and somehow Cordy manages to capture the fact that this is Tarzan. And that's a really daring and really satisfying sort of cover when you pull it off, and I think he did so very, very well here. And this fourth published cover is spectacular. This really showcases Igor Cordy's flair for the cinematic, with Tarzan in civilization with the statue, you know, high above the streets. Just really, really cool stuff. The interior art does not disappoint. Obviously, Cordy has a stylized way of doing faces, but even if you have an issue with that, my goodness, the detail and work he puts in is just really amazing. There are times here that he makes the panels a little too dense and kind of squeezes in some dramatic moments and panels that are maybe too small, but that's really only an issue with the first issue. The other issues pretty much are just perfect as far as the panelization and pacing go. So if you've read the plot synopsises for this comic, it makes it sound like an incomprehensible acid trip, and it's actually not. It's actually a pretty straightforward action story, just with some unusual elements. So this is back in the past, you know, back in Tarzan's earlier days, and so Carl Jung is having these visions that are quite vivid that tend to end with some kind of apocalyptic disaster creating rivers of blood, which is, you know, why it's called Rivers of Blood. And then we get a sense of what life is like in Tarzan's African estates with the Wazari and Jane. And there's even a little bit of a lover's spat between Tarzan and Jane at the beginning here. So the Wazari get in this conflict with this tribe of, basically they're a doomsday cult led by this witch doctor. Jane gets caught in a crossfire and gets this curse put on her that possesses her with some kind of evil spirit, and it puts her into a coma. Think like Exorcist or something like that. And so both magic and medicine fail to free Jane from her possession. And so Tarzan has to go to Europe looking for Sigmund Freud, who he's told could free Jane using hypnosis. However, of course, the good doctor is missing, and he has to team up with Sigmund Freud's daughter and go looking for him. Which, of course, leads to some really cool scenes, you know, using Tarzan's ape-man abilities to, you know, get around obstacles in Europe. And like usual, he kicks a tremendous amount of ass in Europe. And he stumbles upon this conspiracy of men trying to start what we know as World War I. And that's it. That's all they established before they stopped the miniseries. Paul Day-or-Not is also involved in a big way, but I don't want to spoil that. But yeah, that's the setup for the series. It was solid. It was enjoyable. I really loved the artwork. I really, really wish we could have got the rest of the story. I don't know why the miniseries stopped at issue 4. Obviously, Dark Horse has had the rights to Tarzan for the last 22 years. They've had plenty of opportunities to publish more. And shockingly, a completed issue 5 and 6 actually do exist for this miniseries. I don't know why they were never published in America. I don't know if they were published as single issues in Europe or not, but I'm going to link to a video in the description. And there's a hardcover book, and it's in a foreign language that I unfortunately do not read, but there's a lot of text at the front that may explain what happened to this miniseries. But I don't know, I can't read it. But it reprints the published issues and then the completed 5 and 6, which have absolutely amazing artwork and covers. I was screaming at my computer when I was watching that. I was like, why didn't we get that? And then an incomplete issue 7, but does have a really gorgeous, fully painted cover on it, and it's just really great. And when you're watching the video, just keep in mind, this is the last page of issue 4. Once you get past this, it's all new material. And so for whatever reason, this was the final regular monthly Tarzan comic published. This has been, I think I accidentally said 22 years. It's been 21 years. But point is, it's been a long, long time. And what I mean by that is that this was the final issue devoted to the character of Tarzan, put out on a monthly basis. Tarzan has had a few mini-series since then where there are cross-company crossovers where he's appearing with another character, but this kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit because traditionally crossovers between two franchises are there to plug both franchises. You know, they both have an ongoing series that, you know, the reader can go and pick up after they read the crossover. But with Tarzan crossovers, there's nothing. I mean, you go to the shelf, there's nothing there. You ask your comic shop owner, they're like, hey, Tarzan hasn't been published in decades. I mean, you can try to hunt down old Tarzan trades and stuff, but that's kind of intimidating. No one knows where to start if they're not initiated in that stuff. It's like, who's Bern Hogarth? You know, what is this? You know, which one do I get? You know, so I kind of don't get why Tarzan, you know, does these crossovers now. There's supposed to be one with Tarzan and Gru, you know, coming up. And, you know, if someone picked that up and liked Tarzan, I would really like to see a Tarzan series they could actually pick up. So Dark Horse would put out one more issue solely devoted to Tarzan, the Once and Future Tarzan. This was a one-shot reprinting some stories that were serialized in Dark Horse Presents. There's also a trade paperback that has more material in it, and I'm kind of reading through that before I do a review. And I know Dynamite did Lord of the Jungle, but that was unlicensed, and for story reasons, I really just don't consider this series to be Tarzan, and honestly, it didn't even last that long. And I hope that Tarzan returns to comics at some point, because that's how I got into Tarzan. I picked up Tarzan versus Predator, and then Dark Horse was putting out other Tarzan stuff that I could pick up, and I just fell in love with the character, fell in love with Burroughs' stuff, and that's why I'm still reading Burroughs comics to this day and why I do most of the videos on this channel. So you're really missing out on an entire generation of new readers if you don't show up in comic shops. And I hope when Tarzan does return to comics that we get the conclusion of Rivers of Blood. I think this is a good story. It's beautiful art. I think it deserves to be completed. And it wouldn't take that much to complete it. There's less than 2 issues to finish in order to finish this up. I think we deserve the rest of this. So obviously Rivers of Blood was the final Tarzan comic that was worked on by Simic International in Malibu that was published. However, the legacy of their version of Tarzan did continue in a way, because one of the writers who worked on that line would actually go on to work Tarzan into a story he was doing, and this would be an unofficial but intriguing version of Tarzan. And so next time, let's visit Old Man Tarzan in the 31st century in Mark Wheatley's Forbidden Knowledge. See ya.